When a respected pastor is caught burying 3 bodies inside his own church, the town reels. But the truth behind the grave is even darker than the crime he had committed. They thought he was a holy man, until the night when a parishioner saw him digging a grave in the sanctuary for the family he swore never existed. The church was quiet, too quiet for a place once filled with singing, laughter, and praise. A breeze whispered through the stained glass windows, shifting dust in the air like tiny spirits. The wooden pews stood in rows like silent witnesses. At the center of it all, on the cold stone floor, was a pile of earth that didn't belong. Pastor Elijah stood over it with a shovel in his hands. He wore a crisp white suit, the one he saved for baptisms and weddings. But tonight was neither of those. On his head sat a red cap, the kind worn with pride in his Igbo village. Yet, nothing about him looked proud. His eyes were low, heavy, his lips pressed tight. His breath was slow, almost hesitant, like a man who knew he was digging more than a grave. He knelt down and drove the blade into the soil. The ground inside the church had been disturbed. Earlier that day, he had lifted the floor tiles one by one. He had cleared space in front of the altar, in the very heart of the sanctuary, as if hoping to bury his guilt in the holiest place he knew. Each scoop of dirt released a memory. Her name was Adaora. She joined the church choir 6 years ago. She was soft-spoken, polite, with a singing voice that stirred the soul. The congregation loved her. Elijah had noticed her right away. At the time, his marriage was already broken. His wife had moved out and never returned. Still, he wore his ring and preached about faithfulness like a man untouched by weakness. But he was weak. The affair began slowly. Late-night rehearsals turned into quiet conversations. Conversations turned into lingering touches. Then one night, in the back room behind the pulpit, everything changed. They never talked about love, only need. Regret followed quickly. When she told him she was pregnant, he panicked. Adaoro, no one can know, he whispered, pacing his office. She stood there with her hands folded, barely just beginning to show. "You're the father," she said, "and they deserve to know your name." He didn't deny it. He just didn't act. He gave her some money and said nothing more. He didn't attend the baby naming. He didn't visit her again. Twins, a boy and a girl. David and Divine. She raised them alone, struggling to find work and still singing in churches when she could. He avoided her every time she came near. Then, 2 days ago, he got the call. Adaora had died. Internal bleeding. The babies had died too, sick and weak. They said she had no listed next of kin. No father was named. Nobody had come forward to claim the bodies. That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, watching the shadows move across the floor of his office. For the first time in years, he felt cold all over. Something inside him, something he thought was buried, clawed its way to the surface. He left home before dawn, drove to the mortuary, and made arrangements in secret. The night staff didn't ask many questions. He gave them cash and signed a false name. No one stopped him. He wrapped Adaora and the twins himself, trembling with every fold of the cloth. Now, in the center of the church, the grave was wide and deep. Elijah lowered her gently into the pit. Her face was still, beautiful even in death. The twins rested in her arms, swaddled in off-white linen like they were going to sleep. He knelt at the edge and stared at them. "I failed you," he said softly. "I failed all of you." He closed his eyes and let the silence press down on him. "I preached about mercy, but gave you none. I told others to confess their sins while hiding mine. I stood at this altar every Sunday, wearing pride like armor, while you were suffering." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." Footsteps echoed in the back of the church. He froze. He stood up quickly, turning his head toward the rear entrance. He thought he saw movement, just a blur of fabric and light, but by the time he reached the door, no one was there. What he didn't know was that Sister Ruth, a faithful church member in her 60s, had come back for her Bible. She often forgot things. She often walked in without knocking. She didn't expect to see her pastor digging a grave inside the church. At first, she thought it was a dream, but when she saw the bodies, the woman and the babies, she gasped. Then she ran. She crossed the street to her house and locked the door, shaking. She called the police. Back inside the sanctuary, Elijah sat again beside the grave. He thought he was alone with his grief. He didn't know the church had already been turned into a crime scene in waiting. Minutes passed. Blue and red lights began to dance across the stained glass. He didn't hear the sirens at first, just the soft rumble of tires and the murmur of radios. Then came the voices. "Put your hands up! Step away from the grave!" Flashlights flooded the sanctuary. Guns were drawn. Elijah turned slowly. His white suit glowed under the beams. He raised his hands without a word. Behind him, the open grave remained. Quiet, untouched, sacred in its own way. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. As the officers handcuffed him, one leaned over the edge of the grave and covered his mouth. Dear God! They had never seen a sight like that inside the church. Elijah looked back one last time. Not at the officers, not at the people gathering outside, but at Adauro and the children he should have protected. "I brought them home," he whispered. Then the doors slammed shut behind him. The cold metal of the cell door clanked shut behind Pastor Elijah. He sat on the hard bench, hands cuffed, eyes fixed on the stained patch of wall in front of him. A flickering light overhead cast shadows across his face. He didn't cry. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't demand a phone call. He just sat, silent, calm, almost grateful. The officers who booked him didn't understand it. "You're telling me he didn't fight, didn't say anything?" asked Inspector Obazi, flipping through Elijah's intake sheet. "No, sir," the young officer replied. "He just said one thing. I brought them home." Obazi tapped his pen against the file. "We've seen madness before, but burying 3 bodies in the middle of a church, a woman and children, that's something else." Back at the church, forensics worked through the night. Cameras flashed, samples were taken, photos were compared to old congregation records. It didn't take long to confirm the woman's identity. Adaora Nwok, former choir singer, once rumored to have had a situation with the pastor, but no one ever confirmed it until now. The twins? No one even knew she had children. By morning, the news had leaked. Pastor arrested after bodies found in church grave. Holy man's secret family discovered in shocking burial. The church parking lot filled with reporters, flashing cameras, and confused parishioners. Some came out of loyalty. Some came out of shock. All came with questions. Inside the cell, Elijah sat through the noise in silence. That afternoon, he was moved to an interrogation room. Plain walls, single bulb overhead, table, 2 chairs. He sat in one. Inspector Obazi entered and took the other. "No lawyer?" Obazi asked. Elijah shook his head. "No need." Obazi leaned forward. "You know what this looks like?" "Yes." "You know we could charge you with murder?" "I didn't kill them," Elijah said quietly. "Then explain to me why they were in a grave under your altar." Elijah looked up, his voice steady. "Because I buried my shame where I preached my truth." Obazi's pen stopped moving. He let the silence stretch, hoping it would pressure the man to say more. Elijah did. "She came to me with nothing, no family, just her voice and her faith. I was supposed to guide her, but I used her weakness to cover my own." "You had an affair?" He nodded. "Yes." "Twins?" "Yes." "Did your wife know?" "No, but no one did." Obazi sighed. "Then why bury them there?" "Because the mortuary said she had no one to claim her, no father listed, no next of kin. They were going to throw them into a public grave. I couldn't let that happen." So your solution was to dig a grave in your own church? Yes, Elijah replied without hesitation. That church is where I lied the most. It's also the only place I had left to honor them. I couldn't let them be forgotten. Obazi looked at him carefully. This man wasn't acting. There was no arrogance, no signs of instability, just a man who had finally broken under the weight of his silence. You know, Obazi said, people are going to think you've lost your mind. I probably have, Elijah admitted, but not before I lost my soul. Hours later, he was charged. Unlawful disposal of bodies, tampering with a crime scene, suspicion of manslaughter, pending autopsy results. He didn't flinch. At the bail hearing, the courtroom was packed. Members of the church sat in the gallery, stunned into silence. His former wife was there too, arms folded tightly, eyes red but dry. Sister Ruth sat in the front row, her Bible clutched to her chest. When the judge asked Elijah if he had anything to say before his bail decision, he stood up slowly. I spent my life telling others to confess, while hiding the one truth that mattered most. I told the woman to carry her shame in secret while I stood on a pulpit in robes of praise. I buried it there because I couldn't carry it anymore. If prison is the cost of confession, I accept it. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. The judge paused, then spoke softly. Bail is denied. This court needs time to understand the full weight of your actions. Guards escorted him away. He turned one last time toward the gallery. Not for pity, not for forgiveness, just to look. Later that night, a journalist published the full story. Not just the scandal, but the backstory. The quiet woman who once sang in the choir, the twins who never knew their father, the pastor who broke under the weight of denial. It spread fast. The public was divided. Some called for his head. Others saw it differently. They said he was a broken man, finally telling the truth the only way he knew how. Days passed. Elijah remained in prison, awaiting trial. The grave inside the church was sealed, but not erased. The church council voted to leave the spot marked, not with judgment, but with memory. They placed a plaque beside the altar. Here lies Adaura and her children, once denied, now remembered. Let truth always speak louder than silence. In his cell, Elijah began to write, not sermons, not defenses, but letters to Adaura, to David and Divine, to the congregation, to himself. He didn't ask for redemption. He only wrote what he should have said long ago. And for the first time in years, the pastor slept through the night.